Before we start with the stories, thank you for tuning in. I'm working my way to putting up videos every single day, so please like and subscribe. It really keeps me going. Thank you guys. And make sure to put out the lights. Here we go. Before I changed careers, I worked with students who had emotional disabilities. But there was this one kid, Marcus, who I was very intrigued by. He was violent every single day. He would throw chairs and bite teachers, and the whole situation lacked any known pattern that we could ever pin down. Some mornings he'd walk in fine. By lunch, he'd be a different kid entirely. About a month in, for some weird reason, I started dreaming about this boy. It wasn't dramatic, but it was creepy. I'd just see him standing somewhere in my house, at the end of my hallway, or facing a window close to my bed. Then it got worse. He was getting closer. He began sitting at the foot of my bed in the dream, just watching me sleep, and I'd wake up every time at exactly 3:41, wide awake, heart slamming, like something had physically pulled me out of it. I just told myself it was stress. 12-hour days with a kid who scared half the staff. Of course he was showing up in my sleep. Then one Tuesday, mid-lesson, this same kid looked up from his desk and said with a really straight face, "You snore funny when you sleep." I looked around to see if anyone had heard the same thing I just did, and he went right back to his worksheet like he hadn't said anything at all. I stood there, holding a marker I'd forgotten I was even holding. I told myself maybe it meant nothing. Kids say disconnected things constantly, especially kids whose brains don't process information the normal way. I had 23 other students and a fire drill in 10 minutes. I let it go. But I hadn't told anyone I snored. Not anybody who could have mentioned it to him secondhand. I mean, I lived alone. That night, I didn't dream about him at all, for the first time in a month. I just woke up at 3:41 anyway, out of nowhere, and lay there in the dark, certain someone was standing in the doorway of my room. I checked twice. Nothing was there. In the morning, I brought it up to the school counselor eventually, casually, like a funny story, because I didn't know how else to explain why it still bothered me weeks later. She didn't laugh. She just asked if he'd ever said anything else like that, anything specific he shouldn't have known. I said no, which was actually true. Marcus transferred districts before the year ended because his family moved. I never dreamed about him again after that. 10-year-olds say strange things constantly, and 99 times out of 100, it's nothing. But I just can't stop thinking about this one time. You know how little kids sometimes have imaginary friends? They'll talk about them like they're actually standing right there, and most of the time, you just kind of go along with it. I had a student like that. He had this imaginary friend he brought to school with him every day. At first, I didn't think much of it. Kids usually get bored of imaginary friends pretty quickly, or they stop talking about them after a week or two. But this boy was very different. He talked about this friend all the time. He knew his habits, his moods, what he liked, what he didn't like. He'd casually tell us things about him, the same way you'd talk about a real person. Then one morning, he said something that I thought to be a joke. He told me and my co-teacher that his imaginary friend didn't like another boy in the class. He said so casually that we just nodded, told him okay, and got on with the morning. About an hour later, the said boy was sitting by himself in the reading center, working on an activity. Nothing was happening. He was completely alone. Then, out of nowhere, he started screaming. And I mean screaming. Full panic. Everyone in the room stopped what they were doing and ran over to him. By now, he was clutching his arm. There was a mark on it, and it sort of looked like a bite. But the more we looked at it, the more confused we were. The teeth marks were so wide and so evenly spaced. It looked more like an adult had bitten him than another 5-year-old. So obviously, our first thought was that someone had gotten to him. We checked the cameras immediately. It turned out that the boy had been sitting there alone the entire time. Nobody came near him. Nobody walked past him. There was no one hiding behind anything. Nothing moved into the frame. He was just sitting there. And then, a few seconds later, he was screaming. My co-teacher watched the footage twice and didn't say a word. Then the boy who had told us about his imaginary friend that morning walked over. He looked at the kid holding his arm and said, "I told you my friend didn't like him." My co-teacher quit that same day. Who wouldn't? She told the front office she wasn't coming back. As for me, I stayed. I mean, there has to be an explanation, right? Right? I was once a middle school principal, which means I was usually at the building before the sun was fully up, coffee in one hand, keys in the other. I would walk the empty hallways that still smelled like floor wax from the overnight cleaning crew. I always looked forward to those quiet mornings, until sometime in the spring of 2012. How could I ever forget? That morning, I suddenly heard kids' voices. It was really loud, and they were laughing, with doors slamming one after another down the hallway, close to the boys' bathroom. My first thought was instant annoyance. How could these kids sneak into school this early to mess around and assume the building would be empty? I picked up my pace. A male teacher also came around the corner right as I reached the door, one of the early ones who liked to get to his classroom before the building filled up. I told him to go in and get them out before it turned into an issue. The second the words left my mouth, all the noise inside that bathroom stopped. I told him to get them out anyway. I stood in the hallway and listened to him opening the stall doors one by one, and it took maybe 15 seconds, but I didn't hear a word from him. He came back out and said, "There isn't anyone in there." I actually laughed, thought he was messing with me, and told him to check again because I'd heard at least 3, 4 different voices of kids laughing and slamming doors. He didn't laugh back. He just looked at me for a second too long. The hair on the back of my neck stood up straight. Then he gave this small, tired smile, like he'd been waiting years for someone else to hear it too, and said, "It's happened to me too." I didn't even ask him what he meant because I felt like I was going crazy. I checked the cameras later that day anyway. Told myself I was just being thorough, not spooked. Empty hallway, empty bathroom. No one coming or going the entire time except me and him. I never brought it up to him again, and he never brought it up to me. But every morning after that, I timed my walk so I never passed that hallway alone before the buses arrived, and that male teacher retired 2 years later. I'll be posting more of these dark stories, so stick around. I'm Elias, and I'll see you soon. Stay strange.